Divine Feminine, listen closely, because if you found this video, you're likely in the most confusing phase of the journey, the part where nothing has changed on the outside, but everything is changing inside you. One day you're trying to stay logical. You tell yourself, he hasn't texted, he hasn't shown up, there's no proof, and yet your body won't cooperate with that story. Your chest feels different, softer, less braced. Your mind gets unusually quiet, like the constant scanning for signs suddenly shuts off. The urgency that used to live in your nervous system starts to fade, and you don't even know why. That's the problem. You're caught between two realities, the surface reality that looks unchanged, and the deeper reality your body is registering first. And it makes you question yourself. Am I imagining this? Am I making it up? Am I just tired of waiting? But what if the shift you feel is not a fantasy, but a signal? In today's video, we're going to slow this down and bring it into clarity so you stop fighting your own intuitive intelligence. We're going to talk about why the shift often arrives before the proof, why you can feel him internally before he ever speaks externally, and why this doesn't happen because you're hoping harder, but because the divine masculine reaches a point where running from himself becomes unsustainable. You'll learn how to recognize the difference between anxiety-driven imagining and body-level knowing, because they feel similar at first, but they lead you in completely different directions. One keeps you spinning, the other brings you into steadiness. And most importantly, we'll explore what actually changes in the energetic field when the divine masculine stops avoiding his own inner truth. Because when that happens, your nervous system stops sounding the alarm. Not because he gave you reassurance, but because the field itself becomes coherent. This video is not here to make you wait longer. It's here to make you free. Because when you understand what's happening, you stop chasing signs. You stop demanding external confirmation to validate what your body already knows. You stop spiraling every time the surface stays quiet. And instead, you return to the most powerful place you can live from on this path, inner steadiness. By the end of this video, you won't just hope something has shifted. You'll understand why your urgency is dissolving, why your mind is quieting, and why your body is softening without effort. And you'll know this: sometimes the divine masculine doesn't announce his turning point with a message. Sometimes the first proof is the fact that you no longer feel like you're drowning. So if you've been feeling that quiet, undeniable change inside you, stay with me to the end. Because what you're sensing may be the moment the running becomes impossible and the real journey finally begins. Section 1. The calm that ends the search. You may have noticed something quietly changing inside you, and it's not something you had to fight for. You're not checking as much anymore, not scanning your phone for meaning, not analyzing every sign, every song, every number sequence, every tiny shift in energy. You're not replaying old conversations like evidence, searching for the moment where you missed something. You're not waking up with that familiar question pressing against your chest. What does this mean? What is he doing? Where is this going? Instead, there is a calm. And what's important is this: it isn't the kind of calm you can manufacture. It's not denial. It's not emotional shutdown. It's not you pretending you don't care. It's a calm that arrives without your permission, like your system finally stopped running a program that exhausted you for too long. A stillness you didn't choose. A knowing you didn't force. A sense that something is locking into place, even if nothing has been said out loud yet. Divine Feminine, this is not the stage of hope. This is the stage of consequence. Because in this phase, what you feel isn't coming from effort. It's not coming from waiting. It's not coming from trying to figure him out. It's coming from a deeper shift, one that begins on his side but moves through the bond like a signal. The divine masculine reaches an internal decision point, and even before he speaks, your nervous system picks it up. Not as a thought, but as a change in your baseline. Your body stops bracing. Your mind stops spiraling. Your emotional field stops pulling forward like it has to drag the connection into clarity. That is why the chasing ends naturally here. Not because you gave up, but because you no longer need to pull. For a long time, your searching was not weakness, it was your nervous system trying to create safety through understanding. If you could decode the signs, you could predict the outcome. If you could interpret his silence, you could avoid the pain of uncertainty. If you could keep the connection mentally alive, you wouldn't have to face the fear of emotional emptiness. But now the searching ends for a different reason. Your system no longer recognizes limbo as home. And when that happens, something becomes undeniable. The limbo cannot stay. The almost cannot keep living in the center of your life. The constant questioning loses its grip because your inner world is no longer available for confusion as a lifestyle. That is what consequence feels like. It feels like your emotional energy returns to you. It feels like your attention comes back into your body. It feels like you're no longer spiritually negotiating with uncertainty. You don't need to chase clarity, because clarity is starting to arrive through alignment, not through obsession. And this is where many people misunderstand what's happening. They assume that calm means nothing is happening. But in this bond, calm often means something is happening so deeply that your mind can't control it anymore. Calm is what happens when the connection is no longer being held together by anxiety, guessing, or emotional overfunctioning. Calm is what happens when the divine feminine stops trying to manage the outcome because her soul knows the next chapter is already in motion. Whether this leads to union or to final release, one thing becomes certain. The limbo ends because the calm you're feeling is not passive. It is not waiting energy. It is not maybe someday energy. It is the internal shift that says, I am no longer available for half answers. I am no longer building my life around uncertainty. I am no longer postponing my own grounding to keep space for someone else's delay. So if you've been feeling quieter inside, less reactive, less emotionally attached to outcomes, less triggered by silence, and more rooted in yourself, stay with me. Because when the divine masculine takes the final steps, the divine feminine doesn't wait anymore. She doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she doesn't interpret crumbs. She feels it. And when she feels it, she finally stops searching because what is meant to be known no longer requires proving. If you've made it this far, take a breath and notice what's happening inside you right now, because this calm isn't emptiness, it's alignment. It's the moment your energy stops reaching outward for answers and starts coming home to you. If this message is resonating, please like this video so it reaches the divine feminines who need it, and leave a comment sharing what you've been noticing lately. Are you quieter, less reactive, less interested in chasing clarity? And if you don't know what to say yet, simply type, I trust the calm that ends the search. Section 2. Silence, internal resolution, and the end of limbo. This stage does not arrive with fireworks. It doesn't come with a sudden apology, a dramatic confession, or a perfectly timed message that finally explains everything. It arrives the way real transformation usually does, quietly, privately, and almost invisibly at first. When the divine masculine enters the final stage of his journey, the first shift is rarely external. The first shift is structural. Something in the energetic architecture of the connection reorganizes, and you feel it before you can name it. It's as if the air between you changes. Your body senses a difference even while your eyes see the same silence, the same distance, the same unanswered space. And that can be confusing because part of you expects final stage to look like action. But this stage is not about movement yet. It is about internal resolution. For a long time, his energy lived in division. One part of him recognized the bond deeply, undeniably, even if he never said it out loud. Another part resisted what that recognition demanded. Because awareness without responsibility is comfortable. Awareness without choice is safe. As long as he stayed split, he could continue functioning in a kind of emotional limbo, delaying decisions, postponing accountability, distracting himself, keeping one foot in and one foot out, telling himself that time would soften what he refused to confront. And it worked for a while, until the final stage begins and that internal split can no longer be maintained. This isn't something you cause by chasing him. It isn't something you earn by waiting longer. It isn't even something circumstances necessarily force. It happens because avoidance eventually stops working at the nervous system level. The strategies that once helped him stay comfortable distance, distraction, rationalization, denial, begin to fail internally. Not as a moral lesson, but as a biological and energetic reality. Unresolved truth becomes heavier than fear. That is the turning point. The moment when the masculine realizes, without drama, without performance, that staying the same costs more than changing. The cost becomes too high. The internal pressure becomes too constant, and the nervous system stops accepting the illusion of maybe later. So silence becomes uncomfortable in a new way. Not the silence of calm, but the silence of pressure. Distance no longer regulates him the way it used to. Distraction loses its numbing effect. The things he once used to escape himself stop delivering relief. What he postponed begins to surface consistently, not as an emotion he can minimize, but as an instability he cannot outrun. He may still look quiet on the outside. He may still be slow to act. He may still not know how to speak yet. But inside, the emotional gravity changes. His inner world becomes louder. His avoidance becomes exhausting. His indecision becomes intolerable. And here is the part most people miss because they interpret this stage the wrong way. You don't feel his turmoil. You feel the collapse of indecision. You feel the energetic end of limbo. The weakening of that middle space where nothing is chosen, nothing is spoken, and everything is postponed. What you sense is not his emotions spilling into you. What you sense is the structure of almost beginning to fall apart. The connection stops feeling suspended. The fog starts thinning. The timeline starts tightening. This is why, even in silence, you can feel that something is changing. Not because he is finally moving yet, but because he can no longer split himself in two and call it stability. Section 3. Your body responds before your mind understands. Divine Feminine. When the masculine reaches this stage, your body often knows before your mind can explain it. It's subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss, but unmistakable once you notice it. The constant energetic tension you've been carrying begins to loosen, the alertness that lived in your chest, the emotional readiness that kept you half awake even when you were fine, the subconscious waiting that made every quiet moment feel loaded. It starts to dissolve. Not dramatically, not overnight, gradually, naturally, like a nervous system finally realizing it doesn't have to stay on guard anymore. And you'll see it in the simplest ways. You're no longer scanning for signs the way you used to. You stop checking your phone with that tight little expectation. You stop replaying old conversations trying to decode what he meant. You stop reading meaning into silence like it's a hidden message you must interpret correctly. You're not emotionally bracing for what might happen next. Not because you forced yourself to stop. Not because you got stronger overnight. Not even because you decided to detach harder. It happens because something inside you finally exhales. And that exhale is relief. This is what most people don't understand about this phase. Your nervous system doesn't calm down because you convinced it to. It calms down because it receives a signal. When the masculine stops running internally, when the inner split begins resolving, the bond stabilizes at an energetic level. And when the bond stabilizes, your nervous system no longer has to stay activated to maintain the connection. Because for a long time, your hypervigilance wasn't random, it was adaptive. It was your body trying to track instability, trying to anticipate rupture, trying to prepare you for the next wave of silence, inconsistency, or emotional distance. Your system stayed on because the connection kept feeling unfinished, unresolved, unpredictable. But when the masculine stops fleeing himself, the unfinished feeling starts to disappear, even if no external movement has happened yet. That's why this stage can confuse you at first. You may look around and think, why do I suddenly feel calmer when nothing has changed? You may wonder why you're less reactive, less emotionally hooked, less consumed by the outcome. You may even question yourself, am I losing feelings? Am I giving up? Am I becoming cold? No. That calm is not indifference. It's not emotional shutdown. It's not you disconnecting. It is energetic confirmation. It's your body recognizing that the limbo is ending, that the constant internal pull of uncertainty is weakening, that you no longer need to hold emotional readiness as a survival strategy. And in that calm, something beautiful begins to return your own center. Because when the bond stabilizes, you don't become less loving. You become less anxious. You become less available to uncertainty. You become more rooted in yourself. And that is one of the clearest signs that something has shifted even before the mind can catch up with the explanation. Imagine this like carrying your phone on 1% battery all day, with the charger always almost working. For weeks, you keep checking it, refreshing, adjusting the cord, watching the screen dim because you don't trust it to stay alive. That's what your nervous system has been doing in this connection, constantly monitoring, constantly preparing, constantly trying to prevent the drop. But in this phase, nothing flashy happens, no big notification, no dramatic repair, yet you suddenly notice the battery isn't draining the same way. You stop checking every few minutes. You set the phone down and forget about it for a while. You don't feel that tight urgency in your chest anymore because something underneath has stabilized. The charger is finally holding. And the most powerful part is this: you didn't try to relax. Relaxation became possible because the system stopped failing. That's exactly how energetic confirmation feels. Your body releases the vigilance before your mind can explain why. Section 4. Final steps. Not romance, but accountability. At this stage, the divine masculine is not suddenly fixed. He is not magically healed, endlessly confident, or effortlessly expressive. The shift is quieter and far more real than romance. He reaches an internal line where denial can no longer hold, where postponing the truth starts to create more pressure than telling it, where avoiding choice becomes more painful than making one. Not because he's being pushed by you, but because his own nervous system is done carrying the weight of avoidance. Something inside him begins to say, "I can't keep living like this." And that moment is accountability beginning before it ever becomes a conversation. When that internal threshold is crossed, it sends a signal through the twin flame field. You feel it not as fireworks, but as grounding. A steadiness settles in your chest. The emotional noise reduces. The restless inner reaching, the subtle chasing that used to live in your thoughts, starts to fall away. It's as if your system receives a quiet message: we are no longer in uncertainty. And that is why fantasies dissolve here. Not because you get colder or stop caring, but because you stop needing imagination to survive the waiting. You notice the change in how your mind behaves. The mental loops slow down. You stop rehearsing future conversations. You stop scanning signs, decoding every silence, or building entire outcomes out of a single feeling. The imagination releases its grip. And you return to the present moment, not through forced discipline, not through trying to be detached, but because your system no longer needs escape. Presence becomes natural again. Your body stops bracing. Your breathing deepens. You remember what it feels like to live inside your own life, instead of living inside a question mark. And this is not emotional detachment. This is self-return. Your energy comes back to you. Your attention moves into what is real and tangible. Your health, your work, your friendships, your creativity, your home, your growth. Your body relaxes because it's no longer organizing itself around the possibility of him choosing you today. Your sense of self stabilizes because it is no longer being placed on hold. The connection is still there, but you are no longer orbiting it. You are no longer making his potential movement the center of your inner world. You stop negotiating with the unknown. You stop managing what is not yours to manage. And here is what makes this stage different from everything before it. It cannot be undone. Once the divine masculine crosses this internal line, the connection cannot return to limbo. It cannot go back to that suspended space where everything is almost, maybe, soon, not ready, later. Something must externalize. Either truth moves into form through communication and action, real steps, real choices, real accountability, or the energy completes itself through a definitive release. Not a dramatic ending, but a clean one. One way or another, the suspension ends, because the field no longer supports indecision. And the most important part is this: you do not have to do anything to make it happen. Your role is not to hint, test, wait, provoke, chase, or manage the outcome. Your role is not to keep the connection alive through effort, emotional labor, or spiritual overfunctioning. If you feel steadiness, that steadiness is already the confirmation. It is your system recognizing that the timeline has shifted out of indecision. Not because you forced the universe to move, but because something inside him finally reached the point where truth costs less than avoidance. This is not romance. This is accountability arriving. And the moment it arrives internally, everything in the connection is required to become honest through action or through completion. Section 5. Why you feel it first. The bond transmits state. When we talk about the divine masculine taking the final steps, we are not talking about gestures, messages, or promises. We are talking about internal alignment. The final steps are invisible at first because they don't begin in the external world. They begin in his inner structure, in the part of him that has been negotiating with avoidance for far too long. This is the moment he stops asking, "How long can I delay this?" and starts confronting the one thing avoidance always creates: consequence. For a long time, the masculine could live in between awareness and action, in between feeling and choosing, in between knowing and embodying. That in-between state is what created limbo in the connection. And limbo only exists as long as indecision is being energetically supported by rationalization, distraction, emotional shutdown, or the comfort of believing there will always be more time. The final steps begin the moment that support is removed, not because someone forces him, but because something in his psyche finally collapses under the weight of its own inconsistency. The inner scaffolding that made avoidance feel safe stops working, and when avoidance stops working, integrity becomes the only option left. At this stage, he is no longer asking himself whether the connection matters. He already knows it does. That question is finished. The real question becomes sharper and more confronting. Am I willing to live in integrity with what I know? And integrity is the very thing he has avoided most. Not because he is evil, but because integrity requires him to become emotionally accountable. It requires him to be honest with himself before he can ever be honest with you. It requires him to stop compartmentalizing love like it's an idea and start embodying it like it's a responsibility. And here is why you feel it first. While he is processing this internally, you are no longer pulled into the chaos of it. You are no longer absorbing his confusion, carrying his ambivalence, or trying to stabilize the emotional field with your own overfunctioning. Instead, you begin to feel a cleaner signal through the bond. The energy becomes less distorted, less noisy, less chaotic. There is a sense of direction, not necessarily certainty about the outcome, but certainty that something is moving, not in fantasy, in reality, because the twin flame bond does not transmit events, it transmits state. When the divine masculine was divided, avoiding himself, or living in emotional contradiction, you felt it as instability, anxiety that didn't match your circumstances, restlessness that kept your nervous system on, a subtle pull that made you emotionally alert, like you were always waiting for something to happen. Not because you were meant to chase, but because the field itself was unsettled. When one side is inconsistent, the bond carries interference. And sensitive systems, especially the divine feminine's, register interference immediately. But now his indecision collapses, and the signal changes. You don't suddenly hear his thoughts. You don't become psychic in a dramatic way. You don't feel his fear line by line. What you feel is simpler and more powerful. You feel resolution forming beneath the surface. You feel an inner tightening in the field, like scattered energy pulling itself into one direction. You feel less static, less emotional turbulence, less mental spiraling. It becomes harder to fantasize because the bond is no longer feeding uncertainty. You are no longer receiving mixed frequency. You are receiving coherence. The divine feminine is attuned to coherence. You are built to sense when energy is aligned, when it matches itself, when it holds one truth instead of two. So when his inner structure shifts into integrity, your system recognizes it instantly. The nervous system relaxes not because you know exactly what he will do, but because the uncertainty is gone. And uncertainty was what kept your body activated. Uncertainty was what made your chest tight, your mind loop, your intuition restless. When uncertainty leaves the field, the urgency leaves your body. That is why this shift doesn't feel like excitement. It feels like relief. Not the relief of, I got what I wanted. The relief of, I am no longer living inside emotional suspense. The relief of, I don't have to chase clarity anymore because clarity is arriving on its own. The relief of the bond becoming clean enough that you can finally come back to yourself without forcing it, without performing detachment, without trying to be strong. You feel it first because your system is wired to register alignment before it becomes language. And when the bond transmits coherence, your body responds the way it always responds to truth. It softens, it settles, it stops bracing for the unknown. Because even if you don't yet know what will happen next, you can feel, unmistakably, that the limbo is over. If you've made it this far, take a breath and really notice what's happening inside you right now. Not in your thoughts, in your body. Do you feel a little more quiet than you did at the beginning of this video? A little less urgency to figure it out? That matters, because the deepest confirmation on this journey is not a text message, it's the moment your nervous system stops bracing for uncertainty. So I want to ask you, where have you been living in limbo, emotionally, spiritually, or in your own self-worth? And what would it feel like to come back to yourself without needing proof first? If this message describes what you've been sensing lately, leave a comment and share your experience. What changed in your energy, your sleep, your emotions, or your inner focus? And if you don't have words yet, simply type this affirmation: I trust the clarity my nervous system recognizes. Section 6. Calm is not numbness, it's the end of uncertainty. Divine Feminine, the calm you feel now is not numbness. It is not you giving up, lowering your standards, or pretending you don't care. This calm is something far more precise. It is the absence of uncertainty. For most of this journey, the anxiety was never just fear. It was contradiction. It was living inside a connection that was real, but not clearly held. Depth without direction, intensity without decision, closeness that appeared, disappeared, and reappeared like a signal that wouldn't stabilize. And when love lives inside a field that keeps shifting, the nervous system does what it was designed to do. It stays alert. It scans for signs. It tries to predict what's coming. It tightens your chest before your mind even forms a thought. Anxiety was not weakness. Anxiety was your body trying to remain oriented inside unresolved truth. That is why you could feel fine one moment, then spiral the next. It wasn't irrational. It was your system responding to instability. When there is no clear emotional ground, your body becomes the investigator. It watches patterns, tone, silence, timing. It reads everything because it has to. Not to control him, but to keep you emotionally safe inside a dynamic that never fully declared itself. But when the divine masculine takes the final steps internally, something subtle but undeniable happens. The contradiction dissolves. The energy stops oscillating between maybe and someday. The connection stops carrying that faint, constant tremor of uncertainty, and when oscillation ends, anxiety has nothing left to feed on, because anxiety needs limbo to stay alive. It needs the question mark. It needs the unfinished sentence. When the field stabilizes, the nervous system stops bracing. It doesn't have to work so hard anymore. And this calm often arrives in a way that surprises you because you didn't force it. You didn't fix yourself into it. You didn't talk yourself down. You didn't receive a perfect conversation or a reassuring message. You didn't get an external explanation that finally made everything make sense. The calm comes without effort because it is not manufactured. It is the nervous system recognizing stability. It is the body registering. The truth is no longer shifting. This calm does not feel euphoric. It feels grounded. Your breath deepens. Your thoughts slow down. The inner commentary, the constant analyzing, the constant interpreting, the constant imagining quietly turns off. Triggers don't trigger the same way anymore. A song can play, and it doesn't hook into your stomach. A memory can pass through, and it doesn't collapse your day. A date can arrive, and it doesn't yank you into emotional preparation. Not because those things stopped mattering, but because they no longer threaten your stability. The charge drains out of the moment, because the nervous system is no longer trying to solve an uncertainty. You stop counting days. You stop watching for signs. You stop anticipating messages. You stop doing that subtle emotional rehearsal, preparing for the best outcome, then bracing for the worst. You stop living as if the future is holding your peace hostage. The future stops pulling you forward. The past stops pulling you backward. You are simply here. And this is the part many people misunderstand. This calm is not a pause, it is a conclusion. Not the end of the connection, but the end of the nervous system's relationship with limbo. It doesn't mean nothing will happen. It means whatever happens next will not destabilize you. You are no longer negotiating with uncertainty for a sense of safety. This is why chasing ends completely here. Not because you made a dramatic decision to stop, but because the fuel is gone. Anxiety was the fuel. Uncertainty was the engine. And when the field stabilizes, the nervous system no longer needs to chase clarity, it finally has it. And once your body experiences calm rooted in truth, it cannot return to anxiety rooted in limbo. Section 7. The timeline locks in. Union or release, cleanly. Divine Feminine. When the timeline locks in, it rarely announces itself with fireworks. It settles. It becomes quiet in a way your nervous system instantly recognizes. The journey stops feeling fluid and starts feeling defined, not because someone forces an outcome, but because the energy no longer supports multiple possibilities at once. Indecision collapses into direction. Suspension resolves into form. The maybe dissolves, and what remains is a single coherent path that no longer needs your effort to hold it together. Up until now, the timeline has been elastic. It could stretch, pause, loop, and bend around avoidance and hope. It could keep you in that strange emotional hallway where nothing is fully ending and nothing is fully arriving. That flexibility existed for one reason. Choice had not been embodied. There may have been feelings, there may have been spiritual recognition, there may have even been intention. But intention without embodiment keeps the field open because the universe responds to what is lived, not what is wished. And here is the part most people miss. The timeline does not lock in because the mind finally understands. It locks in because the body stops participating in limbo. Once the divine masculine takes the final steps internally, and once you stop compensating for imbalance, the elasticity disappears. You stop buffering uncertainty with hope. You stop stabilizing inconsistency with patience. You stop interpreting silence into meaning. You stop making the connection feel alive through your emotional overfunctioning. And when both sides stop feeding limbo, the field stabilizes. A stabilized field cannot remain undefined. It has to express itself in reality. That is what it means for the timeline to lock in. You are not waiting for something to happen. You begin sensing that something has already happened at the energetic level, and physical reality is simply catching up. There is a difference between anticipation and recognition. Anticipation feels tense. Recognition feels calm. Recognition doesn't ask, will it happen? Recognition says, it has decided. And from that point, outcomes tend to arrive quickly and cleanly, not because you forced them, but because the field is no longer negotiable. No back and forth. No testing. No ambiguity. Whatever externalizes carries clarity, even if it isn't what your mind predicted. If union unfolds, it doesn't feel like an emotional storm. It doesn't feel like a dramatic reunion that throws you off your center. It meets you where you are. Communication becomes direct and simple. Presence becomes consistent. Actions begin matching words without you having to extract them. You don't have to decode. You don't have to chase. You don't have to hold the frequency for two people. Union at this stage feels grounded, almost quiet, and that quiet is exactly how you know it is real. Because real love doesn't destabilize your nervous system. Real love stabilizes it. And if release unfolds instead, it doesn't feel like rejection. Release at this stage feels like completion. The emotional charge dissolves without effort, like a cord naturally untying when it no longer has tension to hold it in place. Your nervous system recognizes finality, and finality brings peace. There is no dramatic goodbye, no confrontation, no need for a perfect explanation. You don't need closure from him because your body becomes the closure. You simply know. And what surprises you most is this. Release does not hurt the way waiting did. Waiting drained you. Waiting kept you suspended. Waiting kept you emotionally braced for a life that wouldn't land. Release returns energy. It gives you your life back. Both outcomes share one sacred truth: finality without trauma. The universe considers both successful. Because what mattered was never whether the story continued in the form your mind wanted. What mattered was whether you return to yourself fully, cleanly, and without losing your center to the outcome. So if you feel this locking in happening now, if you sense the journey becoming quiet, defined, undeniable, honor it. Not with urgency, not with control, with presence. Because when the timeline locks in, you don't have to push reality anymore. You just have to be ready to meet it whole. Divine Feminine, this is the moment so many people misunderstand. When you feel the shift before anything shows up, it isn't your mind creating hope. It's your system registering truth. Something has already moved at the soul level, and your nervous system can feel the difference between fantasy and inevitability. You're not sensing it because you're desperate. You're sensing it because you're finally quiet enough inside to hear what's real. And notice what that means. The old version of you, the version that waited in limbo, analyzed every silence, searched for signs, tried to predict his next move, she's not running the connection anymore. You are. Not through control, through alignment. Because when you're aligned, you stop demanding certainty as proof of safety. You stop making emotional bargains with the unknown. You stop shrinking yourself into maybe just to keep the door open. You become a person who can stand in truth even when the timeline is still unfolding. That is the real confirmation, not that he texted, returned, confessed, or chose you. The confirmation is that your inner uncertainty has ended. The part of you that used to leak energy into waiting has come home. The part of you that used to chase clarity from the outside now carries clarity from the inside. And from that place, whatever happens next cannot confuse you the way it used to, because you are no longer building your identity around the outcome. So yes, the outcome will reveal itself in time, but you are not living in suspense anymore. You are living in self-respect. You are no longer negotiating with inconsistency. You are no longer translating mixed signals into meaning. You are no longer measuring your worth by someone else's readiness. You are standing. And that's why this phase changes everything. Because when you stand in truth, you stop being a question mark in your own life. You become an answer. You become a standard. You become a frequency that only meets what is real. If this message reached you at the exact moment you needed it, I want you to leave a comment with this exact quote: "I am no longer waiting. I am standing in truth." And if you know another divine feminine who has been stuck in limbo, share this video with her, because this is how we break the spell of uncertainty. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and then watch the next video below, because what comes after standing is powerful. It's the part where your life starts responding to you again.